So we're opening today's conference with a session on the future policy direction in social care. I'm really delighted to welcome a group of senior leaders across social care who will set out the policy direction, the challenges we face and the opportunity for change and improvement. I'm going to introduce our first speaker, who's Anna Kynaston, and Anna is the Deputy Director at the Scottish Government. Anna's going to provide us with a broad overview of the key drivers behind the future policy direction in adult social care, and this will include an overview of the themes and recommendations from the independent review of adult social care conducted by Derek Feely and the key priority areas of focus for the Scottish Government going forward. So without further ado, I'll introduce Anna and I will mute myself. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie, and morning, everyone. I'm having a slight panic this morning because there's so many things I want to say, so hopefully I can do that within 10 minutes, and if not, we can pick up conversations outside here. Slightly overwhelmed by the panel I'm on with this morning, so hopefully I don't let anyone down. Lots of esteemed colleagues that I work with regularly on a number of interesting issues, not least some of the challenges across the pandemic. So just a little bit about me first, because I've not been around social care long and I probably haven't met many of you in Scott Excel, so I thought it'd be helpful to just have a sort of quick whistle-stop tour of where I've come from and what I've done. So I have worked with Scott Excel before. In about 2014, I worked really closely with you in implementing new street lighting procurement policies to support energy efficiency across Scotland. Before that, I was responsible for working with Skills Development Scotland on the procurement of new employability skills that services that promoted outcomes and positive outcomes into employment for young people. And more recently, I have been responsible for delivering large-scale infrastructure programmes in the low-carbon space, including the Fife District Heating Project, Clydebank District Heating Project, and the Fairell Electricity project, which is one of my favourites because it actually brought 24-hour electricity to the island for the very first time in history, which seems quite surprising given the day and age we're in. In all of those roles, I learned to love procurement, which is probably why I'm so happy to be here this morning. I accidentally ended up leading on the sort of ethical and commissioning sort of follow-up in government following the Feely review. I say accidentally, I think I put my hand firmly up in the air. I'm really passionate about procuring public services that deliver positive outcomes, and I see procurement as one of the key ways in which we as public servants can drive system and market change for the better. I was really interested this morning to reflect on what you've already been doing as part of your conference this week, looking at climate change, looking at community wealth building, leadership and people. All of those themes, I think, are absolutely central to the future delivery of social care. We no longer deliver in silos, but we need to be delivering across boundaries. We need to be delivering against all of the national performance framework in a joined up way. And when I move on very quickly to run you through what we think ethical commissioning means and the work that we've been doing since the Feely review, hopefully some of that starts to come through. So what did Feely say? I'm not going to go, it was a very large document. It's been out since the 3rd of February. We will all have read it many times, but what it means to me is people, not systems. And that doesn't mean we don't need systems, and that doesn't mean that the systems are bad or the systems are wrong. It just means that we need to turn it all around and start with the people. And that is really important for how we think and how we start talking over the next few months about how we might commission and then procure in this space. It needs to be about services that people who have used them, I don't like the word lived experience, the people who have used the recipients of care can feed into those services. It needs to be about allowing families who have supported those individuals to feed into those, and it needs to be about supporting more direct input from unpaid carers into both the commissioning and the procurement landscape. But that's really important. We spent a lot of time internally around social care just trying to help people have shared definitions of what commissioning and what procurement means. Now that is like teaching a granny to suck eggs to this forum because you're all very comfortable with that. But in government, between Feely and over the pre-election period, what myself and Susan, Craig and Jen, who've got the opportunity to talk to you later, have been doing is trying to get everybody to have one shared understanding of what those things might mean in this space. What does excellent commissioning mean, and how do we make sure that we get lived experience, more consultation and better engagement at that stage to decide what we want to buy? And then how do we feed that through to the actual procurement stages? And that's what a lot of we've been doing internally since Feely. It was a pre-election period. We had to wait for new ministers to come in and give us a political mandate. So we've been taking Feely and exploring some of the themes that he has raised and trying to get everyone to the same position in terms of official understanding, so we can actually start constructively engaging with the sector on the how over the next few months. And that's very much what it is. I'm keen that particularly in the area of commissioning and procurement, we don't go back out necessarily and consult on all the things Feely did. Feely consulted with real people, he consulted with systems, and he's reached conclusions. The next stage of the consultation, the conversation that we want to lead with people, is about the how part. How do we now make things better, and what does that time frame look like? And of course that includes what the role of a national care service may end up being to support and add value to all of this moving forward. So ethical commissioning, person-centred, quality care of outputs and supporting the workforce. They're probably some of the core principles that we see as central to the future of ethical commissioning. In addition, there's other things around financial transparency, shared accountability, human rights, the involvement of people, and more importantly, how we can ensure the sector is delivering against wider Scottish Government targets through our market creation, like climate change, but not because we want to hit that target in a futile fashion, but because as part of our commitment to a just transition, it's really important that people who are recipients of social care are not left behind and actually are the beneficiaries of transitioning to net zero modes of transport and energy use as soon as possible. So all of these things, I know that Susan and Jen will discuss in more detail moving this afternoon, or sorry, later on this morning session. And if you want to do that, if you want to listen to more about that, then please join them. But I guess all of our ambitions for a detailed understanding of ethical commissioning are against a backdrop of the fact that we truly believe that already in Scotland we've got public procurement which is fair, transparent and proportionate. We've got public procurement in this social care space, which is in certain areas which is already demonstrating best practice. The worst thing we could do right now is throw the baby out with the bathwater. We need to go and find those local levels of good practice. I'm not saying the whole system is amazing. The whole system is definitely not what Feely is proposing or suggesting moving forward, but we do need to go and find those niche areas of good practice and spend a bit of our time understanding what they've done well and why it's worked. And actually what we don't always do well in government, we've been talking a lot about this recently, not necessarily in the procurement spaces, we quite often run very innovative, interesting pilots, but we fail to transition them into the wider system. So it'll be interesting for us. One of the next things we want to do as we prepare for consultation over the summer is do a bit of work to look at the market and understand where there is really strong and good examples of best procurement practices and take the good bits out of them. And we're working very hard with COSLA and COSLA's procurement group to try and identify those. So please do, if you feel that you've done innovative things in this space, whether it's been about how you've supported IGB commissioning or whether it's been what you've done to demonstrate flexibility in local service provision, then please do bring these to our attention. Equally, if you think there's areas where we haven't got it right, then do raise us with those too. I see the opportunity, there's huge opportunity here to use procurement regulations, to use our ambitions around person-centred, high quality outcomes to really transform what we are doing around procurement. But we need everybody to be engaging in that conversation over the next 3 months to help shape what any legislative requirements might be to support that. So all I would say is we don't have any, in terms of the detail of national commissioning and procurement, we're not sitting here with the planned services, the designs already. We need to be involving everybody, and you're part of that process, part of that really important audience for engagement. So please do from now engage in it and join the sessions, feed in your views, highlight the risk areas, highlight the misunderstandings, the assumptions that are being made, and make sure that whatever recommendations we land on towards the end of the summer about what the future looks like, that we are doing that in a way which is promoting the best outcomes for all recipients of care moving forward. I don't really want to say much more other than we will be consulting. The 100-day commitment that the government has already published is that we will be consulting on what, on a formal consultation we'll launch over the summer on what a national care service in the system might look like. And I would really encourage you to engage with that consultation, with the engagement events as we move forward. But I do really think that this is the space where we can probably have some really, really good and detailed conversations about what we can do differently and better moving forward. So I'll close off there and just thank you for the opportunity to come and set some of that out this morning.
Thanks, Anna. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for your comments and your presentation. Music to my ears that you're up for that wholesale collaboration, and of course we and others on the call today will be delighted to be involved in that. We're not going to take questions at the moment. Obviously we've got a number of speakers this morning and we're going to save it for the Q&A. The team will be capturing any questions and comments that come up in the chat, and there have been a number so far, Anna, during your chat, so obviously some interest in really want to speak to you and hear from you. I'm actually going to move on to our next speaker, who is Joanna MacDonald, and Joanna is the Deputy Chief Social Work Advisor at the Scottish Government. Although Joanna has held a number of high-profile posts in the social work arena. In fact, she and I met a couple of years ago, it seems like a lifetime ago, when she was leading the team at Argyll and Bute. Joanna is going to provide a broad overview of the key drivers behind future policy direction in children's services, and this will include an overview of the themes from the Independent Care Review conducted within children's services and the priority areas set out within the promise and the plan. So thanks for joining us, Joanna. I'm just going to hand over to you if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Can I just check you can hear me okay? Thank you very much. So good morning. As Julie said, I'm Joanna MacDonald, Deputy Chief Social Work Advisor in the Scottish Government. I'm working with real excellent colleagues such as Anna and others. My portfolio is children and families, and I'm delighted to be here as part of the social care panel at this conference. As Julie said, before moving into this post, I had the privilege of working in mostly remote and rural local authority areas, including Aberdeenshire, Highland, and latterly Argyll and Bute. And as well as seeing great social care for children and families, I have also had the privilege of gaining an understanding of adult social care through chairing Social Work Scotland's Adult Social Care Committee, during which I've met with tremendously inspiring social work leads across the country, including members of this panel and members of the audience. So Anna's outlined Scottish Government's ambition around procurement, and I'm going to link that a little bit to the vision for social care. So Scotland already has a clear ambition that we all share to be the best place for children, young people, adults and older adults to be loved, feel safe and respected, and realise their full potential. Human rights, health and well-being and hope are at the heart of this vision and are the central thread throughout all we do to improve outcomes for children and adults. And I have to mention that across Scotland, we have seen huge innovation and flexibility throughout the pandemic, and I saw it personally within Argyll and Bute. And I'd like to really thank everyone who's been involved in this, both in frontline delivery of services and importantly, for all of you behind the scenes coordinating and planning and making it happen. We should be so proud of what our workforce has achieved in their commitment, despite the impact restrictions have had on their own personal lives. For children and families, the incorporation of the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, keeping the promise, and renewal from COVID are changes that, whilst they present challenges, also represent a watershed opportunity to really transfer outcomes for all children and families in Scotland. And the Scottish Government policy changes aim to drive these forward with the need to recover and renew from the pandemic and heal, to address child poverty and close the poverty-related attainment gap. We're well on the way to implementing and committed to implementing the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child in a way which brings real and lasting change to the lives of children. Full implementation of getting it right for every child. And I'll come on to that later because we have had some challenges. And perhaps an opportunity to get it right for every adult. And I noticed there was a comment around the transition. All of our children hopefully become adults, and we want to make that transition as seamless as we can. And importantly, as Julie mentioned, to deliver on the commitment of the promise. Also, as Anna mentioned, the creation of a national care service provides an opportunity to keep a welcome spotlight on adult social care and improve outcomes for adults, whilst also addressing the at times challenging connections between children and adult services. And I certainly personally really welcome the focus it's on social care at the moment. New government policy aims to be consistently supported by the evidence about what works and to shift resources and support towards prevention and early intervention. And this is language that we've all been using for years, but I believe the direction of travel and the learning from the pandemic is really going to take us forward in this direction. Because we're changing the approach, as Anna said, is looking at individuals, not looking at the systems. And that's a huge challenge for us all to achieve that. But firstly, we're aiming for a rights-respecting, inclusive and collaborative approach. We're aiming to be child and family centred, with the views and needs of children and family influencing decision making and driving the support that is provided to them. Human rights must be embedded into the day-to-day business of government. And I've been in this role for just over 2 months, and I can tell you that human rights and the rights of children and adults are talked about regularly in meetings. Understanding of well-being and outcomes as holistic and interconnected in the context of a child's developmental experiences and wider influences. And when that child becomes an adult, understanding their aspirations, hopes, dreams, and wishes, and respecting these. And finally, the new policy is aiming, as Anna said, we've got a bit of a way to go to adopt a whole system approach. So not just that we're all talking together within the Scottish Government, the different directorates, but that we're talking together like we are today, nationally. There are 4 high-level priorities for public services across Scotland, which are aiming to improve outcomes for children and young people. They are realising rights, holistic support to families, care and support for vulnerable children and young people, and supporting the children and families workforce. So what do we mean by this? We want to realise the rights of children and young people through meeting their needs in every sphere of their lives. And this requires a fundamental shift in culture and approach to deliver this. We need to ensure our policies and services are designed with children and families at the centre. Next, we intend to provide holistic support to families, and this is a key means of deepening the shift to prevention and early intervention. And the priority attached to this in the promise is clear. We are redesigning across Scotland the system of care and support for those children and young people who can't be cared for in their own home. And that's to ensure that we're talking about love and nurturing relationships. And again, this will require a radical transformation of the care system, including youth justice. And there's work ongoing, as hopefully everyone is aware, around the age of criminal responsibility. We will support the valuable children and families workforce. And oh my goodness, the support and the work that they've delivered over the last 18 months in particular has just been absolutely humbling. But we want to support the workforce so that it's a confidence, values, skills, capacity, and the ability to collaborate to meet the needs of all children and families in a truly trauma-informed way. So these are a bold set of interrelated actions, and the language is quite simple and straightforward, I believe, because this is about getting it right for every child and enabling them as they become older for us to get it right for them as adults. So we're going to fully realise children's rights by delivering an implementation programme based on best practice. There has been and will continue to be investment in universal and targeted services to meet child poverty targets and deliver our goals for social justice, tackling inequalities and building strong inclusive communities. And certainly within Argyll and Bute, where I just came from a couple of months ago, tackling child poverty and understanding the reasons behind this were a huge area of focus collectively across the partnership, local authority, NHS and colleagues. There is meaningful additional investment in services to provide whole family support, and that's necessary, absolutely necessary, to deliver the change required by the promise, to ensure all families have support when they need it, where they need it, and for as long as they need it. And all the work that we undertook around understanding the impact of adverse childhood events has been drivers towards the creation of the promise, which is a really ambitious policy of the Scottish Government. To keep the promise, we need to redesign and improve the system of care and support for those children and young people who can't be cared for in their own home. And this includes a raft of changes, including implementing the Barnahus approach, rolling out joint investigative interviewing, raising the age of criminal responsibility, reforming children's hearing system, improving experience and outcomes for those children and young people in secure residential kinship, foster and adoption care, and with a renewed focus on care levers, so no mean feat. It is widely recognised, as I mentioned earlier on, that we have got some implementation challenges around fully putting GIRFIC into practice across Scotland. And so we are building on the National Programme of Leadership, Implementation and Improvement Support to look at how we support all 32 local authority areas to deliver the ambition that they want to deliver and understand where we need to provide support for that. Investing in the capacity and development of the workforce across all children's services, and that includes education, health, social work, youth justice, and developing holistic workforce planning approaches involves enhancing leadership at all levels and providing additional training and support, which again is strengths-based, relationship-focused, rights and trauma-informed. And so all of the above, that commitment is necessary to ensure incorporation of UNCRC to deliver the ambition of the promise and to embed GIRFIC fully and effectively. As I said at the beginning, we have seen huge innovation and flexibility throughout the pandemic. As well as recognising the significant strain the frontline workforce has been under in responding to the pandemic, we're building on the lessons learned from that response. And whilst more needs to be done, as I've outlined, we should be so proud of what our workforce has achieved and their commitment and the remarkable work that they undertake each and every day across Scotland. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thanks so much, Joanna, for joining us. You're just as passionate and inspirational as I remembered you from the last time that we met. And I'm sure we'll have lots of questions when we get to our panel discussion a bit later, but thank you. I'm going to move on to our next speaker, who is Annie Gunnar-Logan. And Annie is the Chief Executive of CCPS, the Coalition of Care and Support Providers in Scotland. And that's the membership body for non-profit third sector social care organisations. Annie is also a non-executive director of the Scottish Government, and she was appointed to that role in 2014. So in that capacity, she serves on a range of assurance and programme boards, including things like Social Security, Constitution and External Affairs. So she's clearly very busy, but she's going to represent the voice of providers within both adult and children's social care services on the panel. And I'm just going to hand over to Annie. Annie, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Just to check, so am I working? Am I coming through? Is that okay? Can you hear me? Good. Okay. Thanks. Well, I'm delighted to be asked to speak at this really important event. Julie will know that I can be a little bit challenging on this topic. Social care procurement, that's no different today. So I really appreciate the invitation, and I'd invite colleagues in turn to kind of buckle up for the next 10 minutes or so, because I've got some things to say on this subject. So CCPS membership extends, as Julie said, to third sector non-profit providers, right across the spectrum of care and support, children's services, adult social care, older people, justice, homelessness, you name it. So yes, absolutely, we're interested in the Feely review and the promise. Of course we are, but we don't see them as siloed initiatives. It's not with adult social care over here, the promise over there. They can't be. So we see this as part of the bigger picture of public service reform, built on the same principles set out by the Christie Commission, which is 10 years ago. And the principles of the Christie Commission were, co-production with the people who rely on our support, integration, partnership, collaboration, agencies all working together, moving support upstream, so away from crisis, away from acute interventions, and much more towards prevention and early intervention. And crucially, assessing performance, not just by outputs and financials, but by the difference that we're going to make to people's lives. Now, Christie didn't have a lot to say about human rights, but subsequently lots and lots of people have. Feely and the Promise certainly have, and Joanna there was talking very eloquently about the rights agenda, so we need to kind of make sure that that's integral to all of this. So if you look at Feely and the Promise, you find a lot of echoes of Christie. There were specific recommendations in Christie about procurement and commissioning, and again, they're echoed in more recent reports. So I'm going to be a bit of an anorak here, and I'm going to tell you that on page 65 of the Christie Commission, our own submission was quoted, and it said this. It said, the language of outcomes and approaches to measuring and evidencing them are steadily being adopted and developed in care and support services. However, most services are still commissioned and funded on the basis of units of cost and volume. For example, hours of support, hourly rates, with little attention paid to the value of those services in terms of the contribution to the outcomes that we want to achieve. Now, that was 10 years ago. And in social care, we are still commissioning and procuring services on the basis of cost and volume. So unsurprisingly, Feely had quite a lot to say about that, but he went much further. And again, here's your anoraks, right? Page 74. Over the last 10 years and more in adult social care support, procurement methodology and practices have increasingly driven and occasionally undermined commissioning decisions where price and a competitive market environment characterized by competitive tendering between providers dominates. And this is the important bit. We want to see an end to this emphasis on price and competition. He goes even further. He says competitive tendering destroys the very relationships that are crucial to success in social care. So Christie called for fair competition. Feely is talking about an end to competition. And for the purposes of this event and this audience, that's not just radical, that is existential, because public procurement in social care has been based fundamentally on competition for nearly 2 decades. So you might reasonably ask, well, what's wrong with that, right? John McClellan, 2006, that's what he said. We had to get everything on contract, reduce the maverick spend, start the cyclical retendering to ensure fair competition, etc. And that's what we've all been doing, right? So not quite, and I'll explain why. So relationships, as Feely noted, are absolutely critical in social care. My organisation has produced a large amount of material over many, many years demonstrating the ways in which competition jeopardizes those relationships. One of our members made a video called My Life is Not a 3-Year Contract, in which people who rely on social care talked about their distress at having no say in changes of provider post-contract award, how they lost their valued supporters when the staff were tupied over somewhere else after tender exercises. And we tracked a couple of large-scale social care tenders to see what happened to the business. And on the back of that, we produced what we called our map of mayhem, which showed huge amounts of business and staff transferred over a relatively short period of time back and forth between the same sets of providers. So massive management and transaction costs, disruption of services, treating the staff as if they were kind of pieces on a chessboard just to be moved around as we direct, distress for the people we support. And that realization led to, really successfully here, actually led to a reduction in what I would call kind of winner takes all contracts. And we introduced frameworks instead, where people were ranked, but we didn't have that kind of huge chunks of business transferring. But that resulted in a different set of problems, not least because 0 hours contracts are, to all intents and purposes, that is a framework, a great big 0 hours contract. And that drives employer behaviour that we're supposed to be concerned about in our Fair Work agenda. So what looks like a good procurement solution can lead to a very poor user experience. An example of that would be Meals on Wheels, which used to be a locally organised community service. Now, the solution to that, because it was messy and it was complicated and there were lots of people involved, so the solution to that was to bundle them up into more efficient contracts and give them to big companies. And the result was the human contact component of local people supporting each other was completely lost in favour of some guy turning up from a liveried van, plonking down 7 days of frozen dinners and then disappearing again, but hey, it was cheaper and the transaction costs were less. So what's not to like, right? Well, you can see that there is a real tension, I think, between the principles of community-based support, self-directed support, and the way in which we have been practicing public procurement in social care. Because with public procurement in social care so far, the decision maker is always the contracting authority and not the end user. So we need to find a way of resolving that if we are really serious about self-directed support. The relationship with our social care workforce has also been very, very problematic because of the way we've been doing procurement. Open and restricted procedure tendering processes are, in my view, and here's the challenging bit, structurally incapable of assessing the quality of support or of giving real choice and control to people. So another example, like most third sector learning disability providers will be roughly similar on quality grounds. So even if your evaluation criteria are very heavily weighted towards quality, price will always be the clincher. And so when workforce costs are up to 85% of a social care hourly rate, you can see what's going to happen and is still happening. So we're all signed up to the Fair Work agenda, but it seems to me that the Fair Work agenda in procurement is being taken forward on the basis that the problem to be solved here is to force poor employers to be better employers by placing more contractual requirements on them. Whereas in much of social care, the problem is that contract values do not support the costs associated with fair work, and all the risk of delivering it falls onto the provider, with no commensurate obligations on purchasers to underwrite the costs and without changing the procurement model at all. And my final gripe, because this is a bit gripey, I know that, about social care procurement is, of course, the in-house delivery. So direct delivery by councils is completely exempted from the rigours of procurement. And that is simply not fair. And that has led to a two-tier system where you have quite a well-remunerated workforce who work for councils in social care and quite a poorly treated workforce that work for everybody else. So Feely, hooray, because we now finally have the chance to do something about this and to develop a more collaborative approach that isn't about forcing quality providers to fight each other on price, which puts the people we support in control of their care arrangements, including their choice of provider. And there are options here, there's alliancing, public social partnerships, there's innovation partnerships, there's direct awards, there's negotiated procedures, there's all sorts. But somehow in social care, we've hardly ever gone there. And now we need to. And we need to do it in a way that delivers for the public pound, obviously, but also for our citizens who rely on social care support. They're not commodities. We can no longer refer to them as lots or units, or imagine that they're passive recipients of whatever it pleases us to arrange for them. That time is past. So our recommendation, picked up by Feely, is to press pause on any further competitive tendering while we figure out a better way of doing this. Now, your experience in this audience and your expertise is going to be absolutely pivotal in that endeavour. So I really hope you're with us on it. One final note, if I may, Julie, about collaboration. Anna talked about the procurement work that's going on at the moment. I think COSLA's leading that, and how it's working to identify good practice in social care procurement. I am very, very worried that this is happening with no input whatsoever from providers or from service users. And you know that it just won't do. If we don't do this together, if we don't do this collaboratively, if we don't build this new system with each other, then it will not succeed. That's it. That's the message. So I'm going to leave it at that, and I look forward to the Q&A later on. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Annie. Thanks, Annie. As always, challenging points and questions, and you and I have had these discussions numerous times, so completely expected what you had to say, and agree with pretty much everything you have to say around the focus being on individuals and everything else, because who could argue with that? Unlike you, I suppose, I do think we've come a long way. We're not there yet. Clearly, the stuff that's coming out of Feely and the Promise, you're right, we have a pivotal role in that. And we're really keen to develop solutions that are better for people, just in the same way that you are. But as you know, there are a number of competing priorities and challenges around all of that. I mean, I would say, I think that the work we've done over the last couple of years in the care and support framework tried to actually move away from competition and get providers to submit rates that were sustainable, and our rates actually went up quite considerably as a result of that, and it wasn't popular. However, that's a sustainable rate, and that's what we've been saying to our customers. Well, look, you know, I know it's an increase, but that's what it's going to cost to provide that level of care. So I think we've moved somewhat, but clearly a way to go. But as always, really appreciate, Annie, your input, and hopefully we get lots of challenging questions at the Q&A. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Jane O'Donnell, who is the Director of Policy and People at COSLA. Jane's actually worked in local government for more than 20 years, and that was from her first role in benefits and welfare support at Aberdeen City Council. She's also worked in environmental service, performance and policy. Now, her current role covers children and young people, health and social care policy, digital, local democracy and empowerment, and supporting the employers function at COSLA. And Jane, when I read this, I think I went, gee whiz, that's quite a lot. But I also noted that you hold a voluntary position as a trustee for West Lothian's Women's Aid as well. So Jane is going to reflect on both the adult and children's social care reviews, discussing the requirements for social care services to be sustainable, accessible, personalised, which is clearly very topical, and high quality, and looking at the role of COSLA in supporting these improvements. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jane, and thank you for joining us, Jane. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Julian, and thank you everyone for the invitation today. It's really, really nice to come and speak to you, and I'm really knocked out by the panel that I'm on as well. I'm really inspired by all the speakers so far, and hopefully I'll provide some context from a COSLA perspective, and like everyone else has said, looking forward to the discussion afterwards. So Gillian's going to move on my slides for me every time I come to the end. So Gillian, can we move on to the first one, please? I'll start talking while Gillian's moving that. There we go. So it's just a little bit about what COSLA is, and the reason I do this is because when I'm allowed to move around the country and meet colleagues, a lot of people say to me, I don't really know what happens in COSLA. That's a bit of a black box to us. So we were formed in 1975, so COSLA is 1 year younger than me. There, I've owned up to how old I am there. And the important thing about COSLA compared to any of our other colleagues in local government is we're the political voice of Scottish local government. So at COSLA, we maybe respond to things that the UK or Scottish Government have suggested. We maybe think up some things ourselves about what might be helpful in communities, and we try and work together right across the system to do the best we can for the communities that our politicians represent. And the way we do that is we take policy papers up to leaders and to our boards. So once a month, the 32 leaders of the councils come together. There is no party which has a majority in COSLA, so they have to work together, they have to collaborate, and they make decisions on our policy papers and they set direction for us, and we go off and do our best to implement that. The important thing about our politicians is they're signed up to the National Performance Framework. They're the co-signatories with Scottish Government, and hopefully you've seen or heard about our COSLA blueprint. And I've put some links on the slide, so when these are sent out to you, if there's any of that you're interested in, you should be able to click that and it should take you to some more detail there. I guess what I wanted to say most before I start going into the policy aspect of it is, why is the political voice important? So we get there's a fair bit of, angst or criticism made of politicians these days, whether it's local or national. And I find that really difficult to deal with. And I think it's because we live in such a strong democracy that we're starting to not value democracy. Let's remember that right across the world, there are people who are putting their lives on the line to have a chance to put a vote in a ballot box. And it's because they need to influence the services that are being delivered. And it's just important locally as it is nationally. If you don't like what your politicians are doing, you can vote them out after 4 or 5 years, depending on where we are. And that's really important. That means that the power and the agency rests with the people in the community. So it's really, really important. And the last thing I'd want to say is that we work with amazing professionals in local government and across our communities, but the politicians are there to make sure that those professionals are doing what the people in those communities voted them in to do. So it's really, really important that we retain that local democratic accountability, and that accountability is back to the people in our communities. So I'll move on to the next one, Gillian, thank you. And it's just, I'm actually kind of picking up a little bit of what other people have said as well. So I guess I'd want to echo what Annie and Joanna and Anna have said, which is you can't look at any single policy without looking at a wider vision of what we want to achieve in our communities. And COSLA's got some really clear principled positions around that. The greatest one is that we want to be outcomes focused, not output focused. And hopefully that's ringing a bell with Annie as well in terms of what she was saying. I couldn't agree more. Christie's 10 years old at the end of this month, and I'm hearing a lot in the system about, do we need to revisit Christie? Well, we need to go and deliver Christie before we start revisiting or thinking about Christie Part 2. There's a lot we've still to achieve there, so I'm a big fan of that. Let's recognise the fact that the greatest challenge that faces us, because we don't deliver services to other people, we deliver services to our neighbours, our families, our friends, ourselves. The greatest challenge to achieving good outcomes for people is inequality, and other colleagues have covered that really eloquently. If we don't address inequality, we're not raising the quality of life. And I feel really strongly that as public voices and public servants, that's what we're here to do. We're here to make life better for other people. And absolutely recognising what Joanna and Annie have said, it's not about doing something to people or to our communities. We're doing it with people in our communities, and we should be remaining humble and thoughtful in how we do it. And hopefully that's coming across right across the system. Many of the reviews that we've heard about in the policy imperatives, they're rightly ambitious, they're testing us, they're making us think. But I'm going to be really clear, if we don't have the financial the funding that we need, if we don't have that financial security and that flexibility, these are just warm words. We absolutely have to have the right funding for communities, the right fair funding to allow us to empower our communities to then start to design things that work best for them. COSLA has always and will always be clear in our negotiations with government that we need fair and full funding for our communities. And we're very open to the fact that might not always be with the local authority, but it's for the community and it has to be there. Another key principle for us is place, that services must be designed and delivered in recognition of what works in that local context. And Joanna spoke very eloquently about her experience working in rural areas. We have to address this assumption, and I hear it all the time, that local is regional. Well, no, it's not. I live in Bathgate in West Lothian, and when people talk to me about local as in the Lothian region, my goodness, I live in an old mining town. The way services are delivered here is very different from Stockbridge. The way we deliver services in our rural communities has to be different from our cities, and the priorities in our towns will be different from our islands. And we say all this and we acknowledge it, but when we start to design things, we go much wider than that. And that's another reason that things are failing. Countries with really empowered communities and really empowered councils representing those communities do far better than us in outcomes. And there's a sort of annual report which looks at the quality of life across, a number of countries. Finland's always there at the top. Finland has as many people. It has a population of about 5 million, very similar to us. They have wide expanses of rural areas which are remote from their cities. There's lots of things that we have in common, but they have a very strongly empowered council system that's very strongly linked to their communities. And when you go over there to Finland and you speak to them, they talk about voting out their councils because they weren't doing what they wanted them to do. And they have one of the best qualities of life there is. And you can't separate the two. And the final thing I'd want to reflect what other colleagues have said, which hopefully we all agree on, is when we talk about place, you can have the Scottish Government and you can have the local authority and the health service, and we're all thinking we're working around place, but if we're all doing it individually in silos, we're not. We're doing that because it suits us, not because it suits our communities. So we really need to test ourselves there. And I'd want to pick up what Julie said at the start about opportunity. Every review and every reform is an opportunity to do better. Change is good. And I know that before the pandemic, I heard a lot about initiative overload and fatigue. We have to take advantage of these reviews and these reforms because they have been informed by people who have lived the experience with different voices of the experience. And we have to reflect and make our practice and our services better as a result. That's our priority and that is our responsibility. We really want to take all these opportunities and move that focus from treating the impact of inequality to preventing it and to making people's lives much better and much happier. So with that in mind, of the wider way we look at social care and social policy landscape, I'll move on to the independent review of social care. That's my next slide, Gillian. Thank you. So you've heard COSLA say this, we support the vast majority of the recommendations. They reflected our position to date that services should be funded properly, to be high quality. Colleagues across sectors should be recognised and rewarded for the vital work that they do. Services should be designed by those who receive them or will receive them in the future. And as a result, we published a joint statement of intent with Scottish Government, identifying some areas of common interest, which we hope will lead to better outcomes for our communities. Where our concerns around the National Care Service that would take care out of a system that operates in a much wider sense of the services that are available. And I think it was Joanna that spoke about the whole system approach. How do you deliver care separately from housing, from financial support, from mental health and wellbeing, from education? In COSLA, we believe in holistic service provision around place, as I said before, and different sets of accountable politicians and officers has never led to better outcomes in services. So we need to collaborate much better than divide things up. And there are some who'd want a whole-scale restructure of the care sector. We just need to balance between making progress now, between people that are experiencing this poor service or these poor outcomes right now, and compare it to the delays and the cost of expensive and time-consuming restructures. So we're really keen to make a difference now. At the core of a number of the recommendations in COSLA's view is the fact that reduced settlements to local government over the last 10 years has had a huge impact in terms of the services that people have received. And while local authorities have tried really hard to protect those social care budgets, to an extent it's that reduction that led to the introduction of the eligibility framework, and which I think leads to the important thing we have to talk about, which is around standards and what we're willing to accept and what we're not willing to accept on behalf of our people in our communities. We absolutely recognise in the report that prevention is key to sustainability. It's really important that we undertake work as soon as possible to cost what unmet need and there is in the system and to work on preventing further poor outcomes for people. And it's the cost of prevention which will be important understanding if we can attain this much better view of how we can deliver social care. Any increase in funding has implications, so that discussion we have to have right across the system. It can't be at the expense of other essential and scaffolding services, and that can often be the case that we think maybe we can do it by jigging the money about a wee bit more. We're going to have more resource to deliver this, and we have to be really, really clear about that. Work will be taken forward in COSLA collaboratively with all parts of the system, and I know there's an ethical commissioning session later on in the day, and you might want to start thinking about some early thoughts or questions you want to put to that panel. I think we'd be quite interested to hear your thoughts on ethical commissioning too. As Annie pointed out, we have a short life working group on commissioning procurement. We've only just started pulling that together, but I'm happy today to absolutely make the commitment to Annie that the COSLA group will include Annie and her colleagues in terms of the work that we're looking at. A number of the recommendations in the Feely report aligns entirely with COSLA's principled position, so it's work we're happy to undertake. And leaders at the end of May were really clear that they wanted us to look at some of the difficult questions. And some of those that I've written down is the level to which price competition is the driving factor. So again, hopefully picking up Annie's challenge there to us, how we shift to outcomes-based commissioning, how we commission collaboratively, and how we use it to drive innovation and improvement. So I think that's all I wanted to say around the Feely review. Gillian, if we can move on to the next slide. I'm going to look at just slightly at the promise and the plan. So similarly, but entirely, COSLA leaders were fully in support of everything that came out from the Promise and Independent Care Review, and we're really keen to be part of the plan in terms of making a difference for young people who are care experienced across the system. We recognise there's significant human and financial resources that are required to deliver this. So again, you're hearing a common theme here from me, but in order to deliver it, we need to start to prioritise about what we need to start making progress on as soon as possible. And COSLA are really clear that for us, there's at least 5 areas within the plan. We like to think we're part of all the priorities, but at least 5 of them will be really, really important to us and to our politicians going forward. And I've noted them on the slide and happy to go into those in more detail later if that's helpful. Again, there's a significant piece of work on family support, procurement and commissioning with Scottish Government partners and our colleagues in the councils and the third sector, and that was a significant ask of the Promise. So hopefully we are starting to prepare ourselves to deliver some of that. Again, really important to recognise we can't deliver the Promise in silo. All these professionals, we have to work together in partnership across sectors or we're letting down those children and young people. And I think everyone here on the panel and in that wider area that we work together, we're all really up for that. We want to do it. But some of the other policy that'll be impacted by the Promise that I'm involved in will be things like children and young people's mental health, where we've got a board that are looking at that and we're starting to align the work we're doing around mental health to all the different parts of the Promise. So hopefully that becomes quite integrated. How we're supporting youth employability, which is and will continue to take a big hit now in terms of recovery. The work we're all involved in terms of the children's hearing system and improving that. And obviously the very recent review on social care that came out, again, very challenging and absolutely linked to the Promise. And we need to keep all these things together in our mind and not go off and do things separately because we've got separate teams doing that. In terms of what we're doing in COSLA and governance, it's not just the Children and Young People Board that are looking at this. We've also got the Health and Social Care Board and the Community Wellbeing Board absolutely tied into this. And a colleague that's on the call today, Gillian, is also speaking to our Economy and Environment Board about it. So we're absolutely making the Promise part of every part of local government life. I'm very thoughtful about how we work with other parts of governance and accountability in the system to make sure we deliver it. And I'm really interested in people's thoughts on that. And I'll just go to my last slide very quickly, Gillian. So what else? There's other things happening in the system that will affect those 2 reviews and the other ones that I've kind of gone through and colleagues have gone through. We have agreed to look at a fiscal framework for services in Scotland with Scottish Government. That work will be starting very soon. We've got a meeting between Councillor McGregor and with Kate Forbes. The local governance review, where we've been trying really, really hard to look very differently at how communities are governed, and we're very, very keen that we're not sticking to this idea of 32 local authorities. We're very up for that, and the solution in Orkney will look very different from the solution in Edinburgh. There is a piece of work between colleagues in COSLA, SCVO, Third Sector Interface and Scottish Government about how we work more collaboratively as sectors. And we've absolutely committed and our leaders have demanded that we don't miss the procurement and commissioning aspect of that. So that will be much wider than just anything I've spoken about here, but it will be influential on it. And the last couple of things, the European Charter for Local Self-Government, the Scottish Parliament voted that in at the last session, cross-party support. And obviously we know it's currently going through a judicial review by the UK government. But us and Scottish Government are going to work together to defend that, and that will make a big difference in terms of how services are governed and delivered locally. And finally, all of this has to link to public health reform. We now have Public Health Scotland. They're there supporting us. They're part of what we're trying to do in every community, and they're looking right now at how what they do becomes much more local. And I think everyone in the system can really appreciate and benefit the impact they'll have. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour of everything, and I'm really looking forward to the questions and the conversations later. Thank you.
Thanks, Jane. Sorry, I've got a wee bit of an echo. Hopefully that's it, it's gone. That was fantastic. I really enjoyed your presentation, so thank you very much. And clearly your passion for people and improving delivery shines throughout everything that you talk about. And I particularly liked your point about public voices and public servants, because I think everybody that's involved in this, whether it's at COSLA or within our own organisation or the folk on the front line that have to deliver the care, everybody wants to do it as well as they can, and that's really clear from everyone who's spoken today. So thanks very much, and like you, I look forward to the questions later. I'm going to now bring in our next speaker, who is Mr. Cleland Snedden. I've got a wee bit of a bio about Cleland. So Cleland was appointed to the Chief Executive of South Lanarkshire Council in January 2020, which amazed me because I had in my head he'd only been there about 6 months, but clearly it's a year and a half. And that followed a successful period of being the Chief Executive of Gowland Bute Council. Cleland has over 30 years experience in local government and brings a wealth of experience to this agenda and many others. He's also the portfolio lead for health and social care at SOLAS, and he is a member of the Scotland Excel Chief Executive Officers Management Group, which is clearly very us. He's going to focus his input today around the adult social care space, offering his perspective from a local government point of view, and as that portfolio lead for SOLAS. So without further ado, Cleland, I'm going to bring you in. I welcome you and thank you very much for joining us today.
So thanks, Julie, and hopefully you can see me now.
Yeah.
So really pleased to accept the invitation to provide a short input to the Procurement Week and focus in social care. As you'd mentioned, I represent SOLAS in relation to that portfolio. I think we'd all agree amongst a whole range of different priorities, that's been probably the primary policy theme over the last while. Just to share a wee anecdote, this morning my wife said to me, what are you doing today? So I told her about the input I was providing. She said to me, despite having been director of social work for about 7 years and chief executive for about 5 years and spent about 15 years in social work in total, she said, you not think they would ask somebody who knows a bit more about social work? So you can never please everyone. So other colleagues today, some really good presentations this morning. I've set out the key policy drivers behind the independent review, and they've given good illustration that echoes the lived experience testimony that Derek Feely used in the report and highlights the ills and the frustrations with the current systems. For SOLAS and indeed anybody who works in local government, whether commissioner or provider, we recognise those frustrations and we need to be the loudest advocates for change to remedy some of those ills. To guide us in that work, we point to a range of outcomes indicated by the Feely report and expand on these to design a picture of a high-performing whole system, health and social care in Scotland. For this to be effective, it has to be whole system. Many of the drivers of demand in social care sit within that wider system. So the effectiveness of public health strategies, primary care services, how we deal with unscheduled care, all of those elements which sit within the health domain have a direct bearing on the demand and the shape of social care services and the scale of social care services that are required. Where SOLAS and possibly COSLA, if I can speak on behalf of Jane, deviate from the recommendations in the Feely report is the mechanism to move from the current model towards those outcomes. Delivering without the massive upheaval of structural reform, unnecessary centralisation, and genuinely viewing this as a whole system and seeking similar reforms across that whole system, including health. When Derek was given the commission, he was asked to specifically look at a national care service. That came with a media and political dialogue around a no profit for within the care sector, I think was the kind of jargon that was being used. Helpfully, the report highlighted that a full nationalisation of all independent and voluntary care services was undesirable, undeliverable, and ultimately unaffordable. So it's interesting we still have rhetoric around having a national care service, and that means different things to different people, but there are still a number of people who are wedded to the concept of having a national care service, still thinking that that is a step towards nationalisation. So many of the ills that I mentioned above come from the need to ration care within available resources. Resources that have failed to keep even remotely at pace with increasing complexity in community care and demographic demands. The 4-tier prioritisation of need framework wasn't a local government construct. However, it has been adopted in order to ration care, and that's led to comments, as you see within the report, about the process of needs assessment feeling intrusive, and I think the expression was even said that it felt brutal to some people. I've used this football analogy before in a number of conversations, so those who have heard it before, apologies. But to fundamentally change the way that social care is funded at the same time as proposing to take social care out of local government is the equivalent of sacking a football manager for team performance when he's been starved of investment, and then handing a huge transfer kitty to the incoming replacement, effectively to not give you the chance to deliver on the outcomes that we are all supportive of, and to not have that resource available to us. The design of the new system should not be rushed. It's too fundamentally important to make mistakes in people's care. Nor, however, should we be slow to act on those areas that demand urgent attention. I would point to the work on care worker terms and conditions, including remuneration and ethical commissioning, as areas that should be early, considered early, should I say, and that there should be early progress upon. Similarly, there are some aspects that would benefit from a national approach, including revision to workforce planning and interface with higher and further education places, review of care standards, registration and inspection, complex care planning, and other areas that we'll need to define. So a national care service has a place, but its remit should be defined in terms of where a national approach adds value and not on the policy decision to have one just because the current system has flaws. So as today's session is, however, about procurement, I want to add some remarks on a few aspects that potentially will help the later debate. So for well over a decade, the mantra has been to shift the balance of care away from institutional care, and that's quite often been defined as kind of hospital continuing care or even nursing and residential care homes, and to maintain independent living at home. That's based on the premise that institutional care resembles old school continuing care in hospital settings or is not personalised to the individual. It's also premised around the feedback that we have from service users, or in hospital terms, patients, in terms of where they would like to be cared for. This approach has driven policy and assisted with the approach to ration care in order to make it financially sustainable, with varying degrees of success in achieving resource release. And we've all got the scars around those interminable negotiations and discussions about resource release between NHS and local government in terms of social care. Ultimately ineffective. We've tried change funds, ultimately ineffective. So we need genuinely to approach this in a whole system. The above approach has also, as I said, been premised on the concept of individual choice and claims of person-centred care. The commissioning and procurement of care services, so residential or care at home, has featured a mixed economy between local authority in-house provision and external commissioning from the private and not-for-profit sectors. The market approach, and I think Annie touched on this earlier, the market approach that's been applied to that part of the procurement of care services has, however, led to some of the issues identified in the Feely report. And I know that when my time comes for needing care and support, I want it delivered by the best quality provider and not the cheapest provider. The report that Derek has published makes some important points in relation to the valuing of care services as a profession, not lesser than the professional parts of the system such as social work, nursing and other allied health professions. There's quite correctly been a focus on ensuring the delivery of the real living wage for those providing social care services. However, I would suggest that the core issue that we need to address is not an argument about hourly rates and whether they achieve the real living wage and any associated inflationary rises, but rather a much more fundamental revaluing of care services. A post-Feely focus has correctly been around the contracting arrangements with care providers, the sustainability of the sector, workforce terms and conditions, etc. But it's not a one-way street. And in turn, we need to look closely at the workforce planning, learning and development of those who work within that sector, the career progression of those working in social care. The training programme should be extensive, allowing workers to progress beyond entry-level skills and those required of registration. To undertake the basic elements of the carer role, we need to get beyond that and progress into a range of functions and tasks that blur the boundaries between the professional roles. This will be contentious, I accept that, for the respective registration bodies and professional associations who might view that approach as a threat to the identity or existence of their functional role. However, it will produce a health and social care workforce able to perform a range of support that's more closely aligned to the needs of those receiving services. So in addition, we've got the opportunity to reinvent what residential and nursing care looks like in future through a better explained and a more appropriately designed set of progressive care housing, which provides a lot of the advantages of residential and nursing care homes, along with the maintenance of independent living, having your own living space or your own front door, and where care services are ramped up and down according to changes in need. So there is a fundamental change needed to the accommodation and infrastructure we have within the country to deliver on those outcomes. We also have the opportunity to invest in rehabilitation and reablement. There are a number of really good examples in Scotland where a different approach to these services for older people have been able to deliver improvements to muscle tone. From muscle tone, individuals have been able to develop strength. From the strength improvements, that's led to improvements in balance. Improvements in balance increases mobility and lessens the risk of falls. And from mobility and balance has come confidence and a greater capacity to self-manage their care needs and to improve their quality of life. We need to stop thinking about physical health services in terms of professional disciplines such as physiotherapy or occupational health or nursing, etc., and design a form of older persons boot camp that will maximise independence and reduce dependence on care services. These are only a few remarks. I want to just touch on a couple of areas that are connected to this, but we don't have time to go into the full range of topics that the independent review looked at. But we talk about an entitlements-based model, sometimes represented as a human rights approach. And that's a fundamentally different model to the needs assessed or needs-led model that we currently have. How are entitlements going to be articulated? How are we going to estimate the cost of an entitlements-based model? Because actually the figures in the independent review report, you'd be as well putting in a bin. It's based on an inflationary increase on an existing model, but we're going to move model. That's the general thrust. So we need to then recost what an entitlements-based model is once we've defined it. How does that support SDS? And the implications that are kind of silent within the report for the profession of social work in terms of their support of going through that needs assessment process. All of these elements bear really careful consideration. So, Julie, this is scratching at the surface of a very wide-ranging and important policy area. It's actually much more significant and much wider than social care. It's a whole systems approach. At Solace, we're committed to working alongside colleagues in the Scottish Government, to work alongside COSLA with providers, third sector stakeholders, with Scotland Excel, and with NHS colleagues to co-design a new model of care for Scotland that meets the needs, that's reflective of the feedback of the service users and communities give us every single day. So hopefully that's a helpful inject, and I look forward to the conversation following. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Cleland. That was really comprehensive overview, and you're right, it's such a big subject. It's hard to fit it into 10, 15 minutes. And I agree with numerous points that you make, that we would all want the best quality and not the cheapest when it comes to care. I'm not a huge fan of sports analogies, but I liked your football analogy, and I thought it was particularly topical at the moment. And in the older person's boot camp, I had a wee chuckle at the kind of like the visual that created, but completely understand the sense in that. So as always, fantastic contribution, and we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. I'm sure you'll get lots of questions when we join a bit later. So I'm actually going to move on to our final speaker of the day. And that is Mr. John Trainer. John is the head of childcare and criminal justice and chief social work officer for Renfrewshire Council. He's a qualified social worker, and he's got over 30 years experience in local government services. Over his career, he's worked in adult justice and children's services, and he's passionate about social work and making a real difference to the lives of those who require to make use of those services. When John sent his bio through, he included a fun fact that one of his early work experiences was a short time as a trainee librarian, where he was counselled out of the job for being too noisy. And having known John for more than 10 years, I can understand that. John is hugely personable and chatty as well. John, we're delighted you could be here, and you know, we really recognise the great work you're doing at Renfrewshire. We've talked to you about that over the past year, so I'm really keen to hear your views on this morning's topic. Thanks, John.
Julie, thanks very much for that introduction, and I'm delighted to join the panel today. I'm also a bit in awe of all of the earlier speakers. I think the contributions so far have been incredible. The librarian job was really interesting, and as I say, I was counselled out by the chief librarian, who said perhaps you should take a different path, and I'm grateful for that advice, and it sent me on a career that I've really enjoyed over 30 years then in social work, and I think making a real difference. I'll probably not do everything that I said I would do in the agreement to sign up. I'm going to do some challenge, and I loved Annie's challenge to public service, and I think it's something that is required. I thought I'd give you a bit of context with my post first. My post is a senior leadership in a local authority with operational responsibility for children and justice social work. You'll notice I dropped the criminal bit from my title. And that's partly because I think that when we use terms like criminal justice, we put people in boxes. And I like the idea of just being a justice leader. I'm trying to get our HR to agree that that title change, but not making lots of progress there. As Chief Social Work Officer, I currently have a professional guidance role within the Adult Health and Social Care Partnership in Renfrewshire. And I think many people will know the way that we deliver social work in terms of organisation across the country is quite different. So in some areas, the Health and Social Care Partnership has all of the social work functions delegated to them, so justice, adult and children's services within the Health and Social Care Partnership. In other areas, justice and children's services are within the local authority, and that's the situation in Renfrewshire. And I suppose as I was reflecting on this, irrespective of the model of delivery of social work and social care, I want to assure everybody that the staff within that sector are working to make a real difference. And that includes staff in the independent and voluntary sector. We shouldn't ignore that, because they make a tremendous contribution. You heard this morning about the Scottish Government's vision for Scotland as a future. And as Joanna said, the whole service and approach needs to be based around rights, positive health and improving outcomes for children, young people and for adults. A healthy Scotland makes a big difference. Again, as I was reflecting and thinking what I'd say today, I was kind of laughing at one point and thinking, you wouldn't really know that we're in the midst of a global pandemic, would you, when you consider the change agenda that we're all being subject to. So we're not only thinking about what we need to do in the future, we're currently delivering services in a way that we never ever thought we would have to. I was also thinking when we closed doors last year and left buildings in March, I remember the chief executive saying to me, I think we'll be out for about 3 weeks. And I said to her, possibly 6. 15 months later, we're sitting still, some of us in our houses. But one of the things that amazed me is that staff have continued to visit, they've continued to deliver hands-on care. There have been many challenges, particularly in adult care homes, but I think we have made a real difference to people within the services and care establishments that we require. But despite that, we have grasped this change agenda where we want to consider the future for our children and young people. And we need to ensure that children, young people and families are at the core of the design and implementation of the changes and improvements that we want. And I think that echoes with some of what, again, Annie was saying, but it also goes back to Anna in the first presentation about outcome focus and about the involvement of users in the service delivery. Joanna did outline the size of the changes that are required in their agenda across Scotland. And I think local authorities are rising, and we are working in partnership to deliver, particularly with the independent and voluntary sector. Before considering some of the current issues, I should acknowledge that in children and family and justice social work, many services are provided directly with the local authorities. Sometimes we work in partnership with the voluntary sector in particular, and there are few independent, but there are a number of independent, a growing independent market, and I think we need to work out our relationship with that independent sector and get that so that we are all working to the same agenda. But even when we are not providing services direct, I suppose I get frustrated around the process for tendering or commissioning services. And if I'm frustrated, I sometimes then think, what must it be like for a provider who's trying to buy into that? And I think Annie, again, covered that well. And Alex, who leads in my local team for procurement for children's social work, she's a phenomenal guide, and she helps me navigate this path regularly. And I think that's really important to know that we do have that type of support. So as I move on to the challenges, the first area I want to explore is a shift from a paternalistic approach to social work to a partnership approach. And again, I think Annie and Anna, Cleland and Joanna all touched on that in a different way. So many of the services that we do provide, I think we would consider them to be really strong, well-developed services. And they have involved children and young people in their design. But we need to ask ourselves, how do we increase the pace of that involvement so that families, children are involved in the design of all of our children? And they also inform then how the services are delivered. And I suppose I reflect a question to myself that says, would children and families want the local authority to be the person that delivers the service, or would they prefer the voluntary sector to do this? And I think that is a challenge that we perhaps need to embrace and consider. Local authorities, particularly statutory social work, can feel overbearing for families. It can feel that we do still have that paternalistic approach, and perhaps the voluntary sector working in partnership can help us change that approach. Irrespective of what we do, we need to develop family support services, because that was one of the key mentioned recommendations from the promise, that we need to develop family support services that are non-stigmatising, where families are viewed as the experts in what they need and they help direct the service delivery. So I think that again presents a challenge to local authorities and to social work staff, because it means that we need to give back power to those we serve. And I think that we're not all comfortable with letting go of that power. I go back to my librarianship. The power the chief librarian had over me about staying quiet actually was misinformed. During the time I was in that service, the library I was based in was a community library in a local primary school. The usage went from 3 children using the library on a daily basis to 50 children using the library on a daily basis, because I made it a place that they were welcome. When I left, it reverted back to 3 children. That's not good for the children, and certainly wasn't good for the library, and it eventually closed, unfortunately. So let's think a wee bit about child protection as a big area where, particularly for statutory social work, we need to intervene in family life. We don't do a lot of procurement or commissioning in that area, so maybe we could change our approach and think about how do we work in partnership and share power with families, where again they are the family experts. They know their situation. So a strength-based approach, and I think commissioning, particularly with the third sector, could help us create really strong family support services that change families' lives for the better and protect children in a way that we're not currently doing. The second area I want to move on to comes from one of the most salutary experiences of my 30 years career, and that was hearing from those who contributed to the independent review of care and that helped shape the final report, the promise that is now known as. It was clear that while some people reported positive experiences of care, almost all involved said the current system had to change. One of the big messages from those who have experience in the care system was the lack of love in that system. That disappointed me because I think we have a system that should be loving. But I was also, I have to say, a bit challenged by this concept of love. I started to ask myself some questions about what does a love, how can statutory service provide loving services? Can we achieve that? And I suppose I was also a bit suspicious of the term love and worried because at the same time as the independent care review, we've got the child abuse inquiry running in Scotland where people manipulated, I think, their vision and use of the term love to abuse children previously. However, I found a book recently that I was reading. It was written by a Franciscan friar, and I'm not even sure how I came across the book, but he talked about the authentic use of the word love connotates sacrifice, care, concern, selflessness, passion, tenderness, consideration for, loyalty and respect for others. And actually, once I started to think about that, I thought we can create a loving care service. I suppose the challenge then for people today is how would we build that in to the procurement system as we go forward? The third area I want to highlight, both Cleland and Jane mentioned, was the whole agenda about prevention and early intervention. And I think it's an area we could do more work on. And again, the promise asked us to check that. They asked us to think about how do we prevent children coming into care? How do we focus our services on keeping children and families together rather than removing them and placing them in alternative care placements? This perhaps gives us a real opportunity today and for the future to really design family support services in a new way. An important area because, as I say, the children have told us they want to stay with their families, and actually many of them return to their families after their care history. So let's think about that. Let's think about the vision that commission and procurement can help take and how they help us deliver that new area. The final area from the promise that I want to concentrate on today was about separating siblings. Children and young people who participated in care experience, people who participated in the promise, told us that too many children were separated from their brothers and sisters as they came into care. They told us it wasn't right and it needed to stop. In Renfrewshire, we listened to that, and at the end of last month, we took our Keeping Brothers and Sisters Together policy to our board for approval. The policy pledges that when children come into care, Renfrewshire will place brothers and sisters together. This pledge and policy was co-produced with our Children's Champions Board, a group of care experienced young people. The policy might result in Renfrewshire looking to commission new services for children in a way we haven't previously. So how would we commission an individual family support service with that family to prevent the need for care? So I think again an area we could all work on together. There are some strong partnerships across the west of Scotland in terms of how local authorities have worked together, and I know that in Cleland's area, working with North Lanarkshire, his council has developed some similar services. In Renfrewshire, we're part of a partnership around the joint investigative interview approach to help children in the protection arena. It's it's 4 local authorities, including ourselves, 2 police divisions and the voluntary sector. In Cleland's area, I know that again they're working on that. So again, we need to think about how do we as public services, as local authorities, work on a cross-boundary area to commission services where perhaps we can't do them and deliver them ourselves, but still make them really local to the area that you're in. There is one area I think that in the social care world that I would like a national solution to, because I'm not sure that there's a national solution to all of this, but that is in relation to secure care. Secure care is the most restrictive type of care for Scotland's most vulnerable and at-risk children. I currently wouldn't want to be the people trying to provide that service, because you never know if you're going to have a young person in your care service or not. We would obviously not want to have children there, but it does mean that their model and financial planning is at risk. So I think the Scottish Government needs to grasp that nettle and fund secure care directly as a provision from government that makes it sustainable and makes it available for those young people who do require it. I'm going to finish soon, but there are two areas I'd quite like to touch on. The first is workforce and the second is technology. The pandemic has been, as Joanna acknowledged, a real challenge to all of us, but it also allowed us to work in a really flexible manner. It allowed us to consider how we work with families, and I think it challenged, particularly around the protection services, a different type of partnership. We gave more power to families, perhaps we need to develop that further, and we've not particularly used self-directed support in the protection world yet, and perhaps there's an opportunity there. Many staff continue to work in a blended model, and they will continue to do so. That brings some stresses and strains, particularly around how we support staff, so we need to give some consideration to that. I also think there's a big training agenda, and perhaps we need to give an exploration of what are the training needs for the workforce for the future. Despite my concerns, I do think that our staff over the past 15 months have delivered incredible work, and the dedication of staff through the pandemic should be recognised. I was speaking to our head of improvement a few weeks ago, and he talked about delivering over 15 months an agenda that he previously thought would take 5 or 10 years. The pandemic forced us to do things differently, and technology was certainly one of them. This conference probably would never have taken place like this had we not had the pandemic, and it works reasonably well. It's not a replacement for everything, but it does work reasonably well. I'd always considered that technology had more of a role in the adult world, but actually I'm now convinced that the pandemic has put technology front and centre for children's social work as well. It could help us consider the way we work for families. We've had child protection conferences where families have been in the room, perhaps with a supportive individual, and everyone else has come in through a Teams call. That's reduced the stress in the families and actually given them a degree of power that they don't have when they're sitting in a room with 10 or 15 professionals who are all focusing on them. So I think the technology there could be improved, but are there other ways we could use technology that have been used currently in the adult world that might help us protect families? So just as I finish, the last 15 months, I think, have changed our conversations. We need to make sure that as we go forward, we embed and meet the ambitions of Scotland, that we embed the United Nations Charter for the Rights of the Child, that we deliver the promise, that we develop and support the workforce, that we make sure that families and children are central to what we do. And if we can do that, then we will deliver, I think, safe services that make a real difference to the individuals we are proud to support. I hope this hasn't come across as a ramble or reinforced myths about social workers. And I thank you for listening and really looking forward to the question and panel session. Thank you.
John, thanks very much. As always, a really balanced view, and you raised some fantastic points. I liked your description of love. I know it's not your description, but I like the quotation that you shared with us. And interesting that the pandemic has forced us down some routes that are actually possibly an improvement, and time will tell. And you're right, I mean, this conference, we've done it over 5 days. 4 days, because we had to meet the buyer on Tuesday. We'd never have been able to do that previously. We wouldn't have been able to resource it, but because we're online, so every cloud and all of that. But thanks again, John. What I'm going to do is push out the next session a little bit to give everybody a bit of a break. Before I do that, obviously I've hugely enjoyed the contributions of every one of our speakers this morning. There's a really clear thread connecting all the speakers around the need for better collaboration and ultimately the need for us all to produce better outcomes for the people that we serve. But I wanted to personally thank all the speakers for agreeing to speak this morning. As you know, our next session is the Q&A session, and you'll have the opportunity to put questions to the panel and the folks that are here. And we'll actually be joined by Toria Fraser, Social Care Support Manager at the Scottish Government as well. So I'm going to suggest that we rejoin at 10:50, give everybody a chance to refresh and grab a cup of tea or coffee before we join again. And with that, I'll close this morning's session. Thanks, everyone.